I'm going to call out an elephant in the room. If you were to go solely from stuff you see online, it's practically impossible to tell what's the correct approach to playing the kick drum. You should play heel down. Except that you should play heel up. You should do the slide. Except that you should do the heel toe. Except that you should do neither and forget all that needless complication and just bounce on the ball of your foot. And if you think this is just about online stuff, it's not. I've had a bunch of students from every walk of life, and trust me when I say that there's a huge disparity in advice they've gotten from real life flesh and blood teachers too. But here's the thing. A lot of people giving the advice are good players. And the stuff is clearly working for them. So how can it be that there can be all these seemingly completely contradictory hot takes, and each one is seemingly working for somebody? And more to the point, what should you actually do to make the kick drum better? Well, let's start with who are you anyway? Most of the students who approach me need to get more efficient with the kick drum. They may have cursory doubles, but many have issues playing as fast and loud for as long as they need to. Some play heel down and others play some school of heel up. They've seen players from the just let it bounce school or heel toe or the slide, but they're having trouble putting it all together. And I'll put my hand up as somebody in the it doesn't have to be that complicated category. I play mostly heel up and my technique looks pretty simple. It just looks like bouncing on the ball of the foot, like a nervous twitch when you're taking an exam. But through my years of teaching, I've learned that just because something looks simple doesn't mean it is. Riding a bike looks simple.
There you go.
Try telling your 5-year-old it's simple, you just balance, and see how that goes. Sorry, no actual 5-year-olds were harmed in the creation of this silly joke. Sometimes to do the thing that looks really simple, you need an approach that looks more complex, because the simple thing is actually eliding a lot of layers of muscle memory. Long story short, today I'm going to try to wade through some of the layers to help you make sense of why each player might be saying what they're saying. And more importantly maybe, I'll show you what I'd recommend to get your kick speed and power better. Oh, I'm Nate, and people call me the 80-20 drummer. Not many, but some do. And on today's video, why is all kick drum advice seemingly contradictory? And what should you actually do? Stay tuned. And folks, today's video is brought to you by me, the 80-20 drummer. And if you're having trouble keeping all this stuff straight, like how it lines up, what connects to what should you actually do? You might be tempted to take notes, and I'm here to tell you, you don't have to do that. We've made you a completely free study guide that you can download by clicking the link below the player and telling us where to send it on the next page. With that, let's go on. Let's first lay out some of the primary approaches I've seen students bring in, starting with that of podcast guest Benny Greb. Benny's philosophy appears to agree with mine to a large degree. You want to use the calf muscle to push up through the thigh, then the thigh weight to make the kick drum stroke. And via a little ankle flick that's actually not little or unimportant at all, but is actually about 65% of the entire thing, you get a second stroke for free. I'm going to play an actual clip of Benny now, so if anything I said was wrong, chalk that up to my fault, but listen to what Benny's actually saying over my memory of it.
Okay, do it. Now, you lift your knee so it stays where it is, that amount of space between floor and heel, and you do that. I don't want your knee to go up and down, right? Your knee stays where it is, and you do that.
Let's talk about why I think this is largely accurate. And to do that, I'll spill some beans about what I think the fundamentals are. To play heel up effectively, we need to do at least two things. Maybe more than that, but at least these two things. The first is create a perpetual motion machine, where little flicks of the ankle keep the weight of the leg dancing on the pedal, with only as much force as is needed to redirect the beater back into the drum after the spring returns it to us. The second is start and stop that under control. Which brings us to major mistake number one I see students making with kick drum technique, using the hip flexor to elevate the leg. As my friend Brandon Green points out in this video, that's super inefficient.
If I practice with a hip flexion dominant stroke, I'm just going to get better at doing this, so getting faster becomes hard because these are gigantic muscles and are strong but inefficient for speed.
But it is the most obvious way to load up that ankle flick dynamo, because it has to start with the thigh in the elevated position. Otherwise, it's just heel down. Okay, let's talk about where I've seen this go wrong with students, and I have to emphasize that this is not because anything Benny is saying is incorrect, but rather that a beginner who can only absorb a few things at a time might misinterpret some of it understandably. Anyway, where I've seen it go wrong is on the second stroke. Once the beater returns to the head for the first time, at least a few students were forgetting to make the ankle flick to ensure that the second stroke of the double would be as loud as the first. They just assumed that would happen automatically. And it turns out this is something that's a little hard to teach. In fact, bring it in for a second. Let's stop for just a second and talk about the fundamental thing that makes teaching the drums so hard. I can never feel what it feels like to be a student, and they can never feel what it feels like to be me. That means I, the teacher, have to use proxies. Visual ones, sound ones, and even asking the student how it feels. With that in mind, let's look at two of the major, seemingly contradictory kick drum techniques, beginning with the slide. The major innovation of the slide is teaching a forward movement of the foot to capture the second stroke of a double. So you push off the ball of the foot like Benny, then after the initial stroke, you shift the ball of the foot forward on the foot plate. Maybe you're seeing footage of me doing it, but hopefully I found some footage of people who are actually high level with this technique, so they can give it its due. First, let's talk about why I think this works. By moving your foot forward, you're going to the end of the lever on the kick pedal, so you require less force to move the beater. Just as when you walk from the center of a seesaw to the end, it requires less weight to push it to the ground. So you're getting one stroke from leg weight, by letting the spring return the beater when the foot is close to the center, and hence less able to oppose the spring. And you're getting a second one more or less for free by extending the foot toward the front of the foot plate, where the spring is less able to resist the weight of the foot. Now, where do I see this going wrong? Well, it is a lot of motion to introduce into a technique. One of the major things I tell students is not to let the foot lose contact with the plate, because you're losing efficiency, like stealing a bounce on a trampoline. But when you have this much motion, it's harder to know if you're getting the most efficient stroke. Also, when you're shifting all that weight to the end of the lever, it's a lot easier to mash the beater into the head, which is a valid vibe, but I'm with Elitch and the new school of drummers who think it's good to be able to play off the head if you want to. And finally, just to put this question in your head, is it necessary to make the physics work, or is it more helpful because it's a visual proxy for how it should feel? I'll leave that there for a second. But it does solve the whole what do I do for the second stroke thing. Just as another technique does, the heel toe. With the heel toe, the emphasis is on making the first sound with a flat foot, then transitioning the weight into the ball of the foot, the toe, for the second stroke. Practitioners of this technique often use something like the Benny approach to load up the leg weight, then think about dropping the whole foot evenly on the pedal for the initial stroke.
So the first stroke is like this.
One big proponent of this approach is my friend and former coaching partner, Jacob Evans. One of his coaching philosophies was, keep it simple, and he found this was the simplest way to incept that proper muscle memory. Let's cover why I think it's useful. Remember those two things we need for effective heel up. First, we need a way to load up that leg weight, so we have energy to put down into the pedal. Then, we need that perpetual motion machine, that nervous twitch of continuous ankle flicking, dancing with the spring to maintain the strokes. And recall that the really hard part of teaching this is getting the student to feel the flick with the ankle that needs to happen to get stroke number 2 and all the subsequent strokes. The heel toe makes that explicit. By suggesting a full foot on the pedal, you can't not feel the transition into the ball of the foot for the second stroke. But let's talk about where I've seen it go off the rails a little bit. And not because of any inherent flaw in the technique, but rather the room for misunderstandings from beginners. Just like the slide, this introduces a lot of motion into the system. And I've seen students really pick their toes up by using their tibialis anterior, or what I only know thanks to Brandon Green, but it's the shin splint muscle in the front of your shins, losing contact with the pedal. The other thing is, just as with the slide, when students slam their foot weight forward, it can be easy to plant the beater, which makes more delicate playing more difficult. Ultimately, my major question is whether in the steps required to get efficient with the heel toe, you might as well just get efficient with a simpler motion. Okay, so we're some amount of time into the video and I still haven't done the big reveal. How can all of these techniques be true but still contradictory? Here's where I really wish 80/20 had the budget to do some slick graphics like the Vox channel guys or something. Buy some of my courses at the link below. But here it is in my humble opinion. To play the kick efficiently, you need those two things we talked about. Load up the weight of the leg without using the hip flexors, and once airborne, use the ankle flick to resist the spring just enough to keep returning the beater to the head. So Benny's got us covered with the initiation of the stroke. But the motor movements involved in that ankle flick are difficult to see in video. We need a way to communicate to a student how it's supposed to feel. Slide and heel toe work intrinsically, but also solve that communication gap. But let's first look at why they probably work for their proponents. Slide, as we covered, gets that second stroke by making a forward motion with the foot. You can't not move the ankle and still advance the foot forward, so it has that covered. But you also probably reap some efficiency benefits by going to the end of the lever. Heel toe solves the same problem by making the weight shift big enough to see on video. If you're landing on the whole foot, then shifting the weight forward into the ball of the foot, you can't not get that ankle motion necessary for the second and subsequent strokes. Great! So why don't I teach these techniques? For the same reason I don't teach the Ed Shaughnessy ride cymbal technique with the lateral motion of the stick beat on the ride cymbal. That motion demonstrates visually what's happening underneath, allowing a student a step toward feeling the way you feel. That's why with some students who have tried the Benny thing and are having trouble getting the second stroke loud enough, I recommend they try something like heel toe, but only to a point. Only to the point where they can feel the ankle flick between the first and second strokes. Then, I recommend they just simplify the motion way down, elevate, ankle flick. And it's here I'm reminded of a passage in Josh Waitzkin's book, The Art of Learning, which I'm not sure holds up, but in this passage I believe he's paraphrasing Bruce Lee. The next phase of my martial growth would involve turning the large into the small. My understanding of this process, in the spirit of my numbers to leave numbers method of chess study, is to touch the essence of a technique and then to incrementally condense the external manifestation of the technique while keeping true to its essence. Over time, expansiveness decreases while potency increases. I call this method making smaller circles.
And that's how you get the gig.
Anyway, did we do a thing, you guys? Leave a polite comment below the video, let me know what you think. And remember, if you'd like a completely free study guide for all the material in this video, you have only to click the link below the player and tell us where to send it on the next page. Dudes, it's been real, always enjoy these. See you again real soon in another Lesson of the Week.